My name is Olivia Morgan. I'm 32. And this was my first time going home since the night they threw me out for refusing to be their perfect daughter. The house looked the same: white columns, pruned roses, every detail screaming control. Before I could knock, my mother opened the door. No smile, no hug, just a sharp, "You're late." I glanced at my watch. 5 minutes early. But what's new? "Head to the kitchen," she said. "The catering staff needs help." I stood there, pride burning, heart pounding, but I stepped inside anyway. If they thought I came back to serve, they were about to learn otherwise. If this kind of story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Let's begin. 7 years of silence, one cream-colored envelope, and just like that, I was back. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, sandwiched between a credit card bill and a tech journal I hadn't opened in months. Its gold lettering glinted under my kitchen light like it was daring me to open it. My hands trembled, but I unfolded it anyway. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the wedding of Emily Catherine Morgan." Of course. Of course it would be her. I let the envelope drop onto my marble counter and stared at it like it had personally offended me. For 2 days, I went back and forth, tossing it in the trash, pulling it back out, reading it again like the words might change. But here I was, driving toward Greenwich, Connecticut. Every mile I covered felt like peeling back an old scab. The trees lining the road looked the same. Too neat. Too perfect. The air still carried that mix of wealth and pretense. As I pulled into the circular driveway of the Morgan house, my stomach knotted tighter than it had in years. The white columns, the brick facade, the pristine rose garden out front. None of it had changed. Every bloom sat in obedient rows, like they knew better than to disappoint Carol Morgan. I sat in the car for a beat, breathing deep, hands white-knuckling the steering wheel. Memories rushed in. My father's voice still sharp in my mind. "Don't come back until you're ready to be useful." That night 7 years ago had ended with suitcases, tears, and a slammed door. Adjusting my suit jacket, I stepped out and walked up to the door. Before I could even raise a hand to knock, the door swung open. Carol stood there in a cream blouse and pearl earrings, her expression flat as ever. Her gaze slid over me, pausing at my tailored suit like it personally offended her. "You're late," she said. I glanced at my watch. "I'm 5 minutes early." She turned on her heel, her voice floating back to me like a command. "Head to the kitchen. The catering staff needs extra hands." For a moment, I stayed rooted in place, heart pounding, pride screaming at me to walk back to my car. But instead, I followed her inside. The marble floors gleamed. The chandelier in the foyer threw fractured light across the space like it always had. The family portraits along the hallway hadn't changed, still frozen moments from a family I'd been erased from. The kitchen buzzed with activity. The scent of lemon polish and roasted vegetables filled the air. Staff darted around, arms full of tablecloths, trays, and crystal glassware. One woman holding a clipboard barely glanced at me before pointing at a stack of linens. "Table settings, banquet room." Before I could move, my mother's voice cut in again. "And make sure the glassware is spotless. No fingerprints in the photos." I swallowed hard, walked toward the linens, and let muscle memory take over. Folding napkins, aligning silverware, checking wine glasses for smudges. Through the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of Emily at the top of the staircase, mid-final fitting in her wedding dress. Lace and satin, of course. Her hair curled into soft, elegant waves. She looked like everything my mother wanted. A perfect daughter for a perfect day. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and chose to ignore me. I turned back to the settings, adjusting a fork that was already straight. Hours passed. The house filled with voices, clinking glass, and controlled chaos. Every time I passed by a staff member, they nodded politely, probably thinking I was one of them. I didn't correct them. Curiosity got the better of me when I spotted the finalized guest list sitting on the counter near the catering schedule. My eyes scanned quickly. Emily Morgan, Bride, Thomas Palmer, groom, Richard and Carol Morgan, hosts, guests, business partners, family friends, socialites. Then, farther down, logistics staff. I found my name. Wedged between the florist coordinator and the AV technician, I let out a bitter laugh, low and sharp. Fine. I picked up the clipboard resting nearby, holding it tighter than necessary. Fine, I whispered, gripping the clipboard tighter. Let's play Maid. For now. By noon, I wasn't just invisible. I was officially the help. The clipboard dug into my palm, its edges sharper with every passing hour. I moved from one table to the next, counting wine glasses, checking for water spots, making sure the menu card sat perfectly centered atop each charger plate. Every detail had to be flawless, not because anyone would thank me, but because failure would give my mother one more reason to be disappointed. The sun hung high over Greenwich, turning the backyard into something that looked like it belonged in a lifestyle magazine. White tents fluttered in the breeze. Rows of chiavari chairs lined the lawn like soldiers waiting for inspection. Every square inch of the garden screamed curated perfection. And me? I floated through it all like a hired extra in someone else's life. Which agency are you with? A young guy from catering asked, juggling a tray of silverware as he brushed past me. I offered him the faintest of smiles, said nothing, and kept walking. By the rose archway, I caught my parents mid-conversation. Their voices were low, but carried enough for me to catch every syllable. At least she's finally being useful, my mother said, smoothing the skirt of her beige linen dress. My father gave a dry grunt. Took her long enough? The words landed like tiny cuts. Familiar, but no less sharp for it. I gripped the clipboard tighter, swallowing the burn rising in my throat. There was a time I might have cried over that. Today, I just filed it away. Another entry in the long list of insults. As I bent over a stack of folded napkins, I felt a tug at my sleeve. Emily. She stood partially hidden behind a row of hydrangeas, her face pale, her eyes darting around like a cornered animal. Can we talk? She whispered. I nodded and followed her around the side of the house, past the gardenias, to the gazebo we used to play under as kids. From here, the sounds of wedding prep faded to a distant hum. I didn't want this, Emily said, wringing her hands. I didn't want you treated like this. I told Mom and Dad, but they... Her voice cracked. I studied her more closely. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders hunched like she was bracing for impact. The Emily I remembered had always been polished, rehearsed, perfect. This version looked frayed at the edges. It's fine, I lied. Really? Her lip quivered. I just want this weekend to be over. I opened my mouth to say something else, but the sound of footsteps nearby made us both freeze. I instinctively pressed myself against one of the gazebo's wooden columns, hidden just enough to stay out of view. Two voices. One familiar, one not. My father, and Gregory Palmer. Their conversation drifted over on the breeze, each word landing with the weight of a stone. The merger will go through right after the wedding, Gregory said, his tone light, like he was discussing weekend golf plans. Her family name is just leverage. Once the ink's dry, we'll strip Anderson Industries for parts. And Emily? My father asked. Gregory gave a low chuckle, the kind that made my skin crawl. She'll do her part. Marry the boy. Smile for the cameras. After that, she's irrelevant. I froze, heart pounding, the clipboard trembling slightly in my grip. They're sacrificing her, just like they tried with me. I held my breath, willing myself to stay silent as Gregory's voice drifted through the air one last time. 6 months, Gregory's voice echoed. Anderson Industries will be history. By the time dinner started, I wasn't just carrying trays. I was carrying ammunition. The satin of my emerald green dress skimmed my knees as I made my way through the banquet hall, weaving between tables draped in ivory linen and crowned with cascading floral centerpieces. The dress wasn't part of any staff uniform, and that was intentional. I wanted them to notice. I wanted my mother's lips to thin and my father's jaw to tighten. Let them wonder. Let them fume. And they did. Carol's eyes narrowed the moment I stepped into the room. Her gaze dragged over the off-shoulder neckline, the tailored fit, the unmistakable designer stitching. My father didn't bother with subtlety. Before I could cross to the far side of the room, he caught me by the elbow and steered me toward a quiet corner near the bar. "Don't make a scene tonight," he hissed under his breath, voice low and clipped. I smiled, slow and practiced. "Wouldn't dream of it." His eyes stayed on me for another beat, like he was daring me to contradict him, before he turned back toward the crowd gathering near the head table. I stepped away, reaching for my phone as soon as I was out of his line of sight. Scrolling through my contacts, I found Rachel's name and fired off a quick text. "On standby. If I'm right, we'll need this." The dots appeared almost instantly. Her reply came seconds later. "Ready whenever you are." Sliding my phone back into my clutch, I inhaled slowly, letting the tension settle into something sharper, something useful. The night unfolded like clockwork. Guests arrived in waves, their laughter forced, their compliments hollow. Waiters floated by with trays of champagne flutes, and somewhere near the grand piano, Thomas Palmer played the role of dutiful fiancé, holding Emily's hand like she was a delicate prop. I caught Gregory Palmer scanning the room from near the fireplace. His glass of scotch barely touched. When his eyes landed on me, curiosity flickered across his face. He approached with the measured confidence of a man used to making decisions in boardrooms and getting his way. "You're the logistics coordinator, right?" he asked, stopping just a step too close for casual conversation. I tilted my head, letting a slow smile curve my lips. "Something like that." His gaze slid over my dress again, amused. "Not the usual uniform." "I like to stand out," I said, "especially when I have something important to discuss." That got his attention. He angled his body slightly, giving me his full focus. "Oh? And what might that be?" I leaned in just enough to lower my voice. "Anderson Industries." His expression barely shifted, but the flicker of interest was unmistakable. I let the silence stretch before adding, "I have information you'll want to hear. Something time-sensitive." He studied me, weighing whatever internal calculation men like him always made when presented with a new variable. "When?" he finally asked. "Breakfast?" I said. 8 o'clock, Harborview Hotel, private dining room." He raised an eyebrow, the corner of his mouth quirking upward. "You're full of surprises." "You have no idea," I said smoothly. As he walked away, already pulling out his phone to adjust his schedule, I stayed perfectly still, letting the noise of the dinner swirl around me. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I placed my recording device on the desk and double-checked its battery and storage. I ran a test recording, listened to my own voice come back to me in crystal clarity, and smiled. Let's see how far they're willing to go. I turned off the light, climbed into bed, and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled me under. "Tomorrow morning," I whispered, watching Gregory leave. That's when it all starts. If I've learned anything in 7 years, it's this. Arrogance makes people careless. I arrived at the Harborview Hotel 20 minutes early. The private dining room smelled faintly of citrus and wood polish, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked downtown Greenwich. A linen-draped table sat in the center, already set for two with gleaming silverware and untouched coffee cups. I slipped my hand into my purse, feeling for the small recorder tucked beneath my wallet. I flipped the switch on, waited for the tiny red light to glow, then slid it deeper under a folded napkin. My phone buzzed once. "Rachel. Standing by. Ping me when you're done." I typed back quickly. "Will do." The door creaked open. Gregory Palmer entered like he owned the air in the room. Navy blazer, pressed slacks, and that smug, polished grin I'd seen 1,000 times on men like him. "Miss," he said, waiting for me to supply a last name. I smiled softly. "Just Olivia will do." He pulled out the chair across from me, sitting with the kind of slow, deliberate ease that screamed overconfidence. So, he began, reaching for the carafe to pour himself coffee. You said you had information I'd want to hear. About Anderson Industries? I crossed one leg over the other, making a show of adjusting my bracelet while my heart pounded in my throat. Let's just say I'm someone with access to internal developments, someone who understands the true value, or liability, of this merger. Gregory laughed, low and amused, like I'd just told him a joke he already knew the punchline to. Liability? Hardly, he said, leaning back. Once the wedding's done, the paperwork's next. And after that, we'll gut the company, strip it for assets. I kept my expression neutral, but every word dug deeper into my skin. Seems risky, I said, tilting my head. What if Anderson Industries pushes back? He waved a dismissive hand. Henry Morgan's too desperate to resist. That company's been bleeding for years. This is his only shot at survival, and he knows it. My fingers tightened slightly around the stem of my coffee cup. And Emily? I asked, keeping my voice light. He smiled, the kind of smile that made my stomach turn. Your sister? He said. Sweet girl, pretty, obedient. But let's be honest. She's just leverage, a pawn in a bigger game. I let out a small, practiced laugh. You're not exactly sentimental, are you? Gregory shrugged. Sentiment doesn't close deals. Women like you're useful when quiet. Stay that way. I stared at him for a beat, every inch of me burning, every muscle fighting the urge to throw my coffee in his face. Instead, I stood. You're right about one thing, Mr. Palmer, I said, reaching for my purse. I've been quiet, but not for much longer. I walked out before he could respond, my fingers already moving across my phone screen. The file uploaded in seconds. Rachel's reply came almost immediately. Got it. Ready for deployment at noon. Some people send wedding gifts. I sent a scandal. At exactly 11:59 a.m., I stood near the far end of the main hall, tucked just behind a pillar draped in ivory fabric and eucalyptus garlands. The hum of forced laughter, clinking glasses, and violin strings floated through the air as guests settled into their assigned seats. The room smelled like roses and champagne. Beneath it all, tension buzzed like static electricity. I scanned the crowd. Both families were present. Business partners, old money acquaintances, a sea of pastel dresses and tailored suits. Every person here played their role. Smiling, networking, pretending. And then there was Rachel. She stood near the AV control table, dressed like any other event coordinator, holding her phone casually at waist level. But her eyes met mine across the room with sharp intent. I gave the smallest nod. 12 p.m. exactly. Rachel pressed send. Phones around the room buzzed in unison. Some guests hesitated, unsure whether to check. Others, curious or simply bored, reached for their devices. I watched as faces changed, eyebrows raised. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses froze mid-air. One by one, they listened. Gregory Palmer's voice poured from speakers and earbuds across the hall, his tone arrogant, his words unmistakable. Once the wedding's done, the paperwork's next. We'll gut the company, strip it for assets. Sweet girl, just leverage. Women like you, useful when quiet. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. Then came the whispers. Heads turned toward Gregory. A ripple of collective disgust rolled through the hall. Gregory's face drained of color, then flushed an ugly red. This is taken out of context, he shouted, standing so quickly his chair scraped loudly against the floor. This is doctored. None of you know what you're hearing. But no one moved to defend him. Richard sat frozen at his table, hands slack against his lap, his eyes wide but vacant like the air had been punched from his lungs. Carol lifted a trembling hand to her mouth, her skin pale as the table linens. Thomas Palmer stood beside Emily, confusion written all over his face as he turned toward his father. Dad? Emily. I found her near the edge of the dance floor, one hand still curled at her side, the other trembling at her throat. Her gaze locked onto mine for just a second. Wet, glassy, a mixture of betrayal and heartbreak. And then she looked down at her left hand. With slow, deliberate movements, she pulled off her engagement ring. Gasps rose around the room as she placed it gently on the nearest tablecloth, like discarding something fragile but poisoned. Thomas reached for her arm, murmuring something I couldn't hear. Emily shook her head, shoved his hand away, and stepped back from him. And that was my cue. I walked out from behind the pillar, cutting through the stunned crowd, and climbed onto the small platform near the DJ booth. I grabbed the microphone without waiting for permission. "For those wondering who I am," I said, steady and clear, my voice echoing off the marble walls, "I'm Olivia Morgan, CEO of Morgan Tech. And no, I'm not the maid." I let that hang in the air just long enough to let it sting. Emily burst into motion, running toward the exit, her heels clicking hard against the floor as she pushed past startled guests. Gregory, meanwhile, pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "Get me my lawyer," he barked into the receiver, voice cracking with panic. "Richard." He simply sank back into his chair, staring at the chaos like a man realizing the ground beneath him had just given way. Some battles end in screaming matches. Others end in contracts. A week later, I sat at the far end of the Morgan Industries boardroom. The long mahogany table stretched between us like a chasm carved by years of silence and bad decisions. Richard Morgan sat across from me, his tailored suit slightly rumpled, dark circles blooming under his eyes like bruises that wouldn't fade. For the first time in my life, he didn't look like the untouchable titan of industry I'd grown up fearing. He looked tired. He cleared his throat but didn't speak right away. Instead, he opened a folder, thumbed through a few pages, then set it down like it weighed more than it should. "What do you want, Olivia?" he finally asked. The question hung in the air between us, dense and overdue. I laced my fingers together on the table, letting the silence drag just long enough. "I want control," I said evenly. "A full stake in the restructuring process, executive authority on operational decisions, and a seat at the board." His shoulders sank slightly, like the answer had both relieved and defeated him at once. "You're serious?" I tilted my head. "I've been quiet. Not anymore." He nodded almost imperceptibly, then slid the folder toward me. "Draw up the terms. I'll sign." Our eyes met for one long second. No apology. No grand gesture of redemption. But there was something close to acknowledgement. And for now, that would be enough. Later that afternoon, as I gathered my things near the elevator, Carol Morgan approached me in the hallway. She looked smaller somehow, her signature pearls resting awkwardly against her throat. "We never thought you'd become this," she said quietly. I paused mid-buttoning my coat. "I know." For once, she didn't have a snide retort, just a nod and a quick retreat down the hall. That evening, back at the house, I found Emily sitting on the backyard steps, barefoot, her hair loose for the first time in what felt like forever. The remnants of sunset painted soft gold across the garden. She heard me approaching but didn't turn. "I never thanked you," she said after a moment. "You don't have to." "I do." She pulled her knees up to her chest. "You didn't just save the company. You saved me." I sat beside her, staring out at the rose bushes that had been there since we were kids. The air smelled like cut grass and coming rain. "It's not too late," I said softly. "For either of us." A day later, the press conference kicked off at the new headquarters lobby. Flashbulbs lit the air. Reporters scribbled furiously as Richard and I stood side by side at the podium, Emily smiling just off to the right. The backdrop behind us read, "Introducing the Morgan Innovation Center, a joint venture for the future." When it was my turn to speak, I stepped forward, adjusted the microphone, and let the words come slow and clear. "Change isn't easy," I began, scanning the crowd. "But sometimes it's necessary." Applause rose in waves, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight on my chest loosen. That night, after all the cameras had been packed away and the guests had gone home, I wandered into the garden. The house stood quiet behind me, each window glowing soft and warm. My gaze drifted up to the second floor, my old bedroom window. Emily's voice broke the silence. "You're not the maid, Liv," she whispered from behind me. "You never were." The echoes of scandal still lingered in the hallways of Morgan Industries, but this time they carried the weight of accountability, not shame. Olivia's quiet endurance had transformed into undeniable power, reshaping not only her family's legacy, but their understanding of who she truly was. Because when injustice is met with unwavering resolve, even the strongest empires can crumble under the weight of truth. Sometimes, the greatest revenge isn't loud. It's simply being seen for who you've become. And no wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth.